Hi, I'm Anas, and in today's video we are going to be working on our heroes for our Idle Moba Manager game. Alright, so here we have it, the hero scene. I just went ahead and created it. It's pretty simple, it's basically just the exact same as the minion. The only thing different is the script and how we basically set it up by using our resource, the different hero resources, and they now load into the game. So we have changed all of the old we used to have from the last episode and changed it into the new component system. Currently the heroes just using the minions state, so which is just pushing, so we'll just go to whatever is closest and start attacking that. That actually means we can go ahead and delete all of the old code, which I'm very much looking forward to. It's kind of a mess. Inside of the root folder we have the scenes, and in here we have interface base, which is what all of our different interfaces are inheriting from. And in there we have the battle simulator, and then we have the enemy, the friendly minion, which has like scene, scripts, and the enemy minion, same thing. For the enemy heroes there is a basic one where everything else inherits it from. So every time you want to add a new enemy hero, we will have to create a scene for it and set up the settings. And for the friendly heroes, again we have a basic script, and then from that we inherit for the bot lane, the jungle, and the top lane. They each have their own scene. And for the jungle minions, there was also a scene. It's not too important. And the nexus, we have the basic, and from that we have inheritance for the enemy and the friendly nexus. And for the same for the tower. It's kind of a big ass mess, and I'm very much looking forward to deleting all of it. I know it's gonna take a while because I'm sure some code is still relying on these different scripts and scenes and stuff, so I'll see you when I'm done with that. It's done. It's finally done. I did the cleanup. I wanted to do this cleanup for I don't know how long. I've been dreading to do it. I finally renamed all of items into equipment, so I can call both our loot and equipment items, and then they're differentiated by that name. Means I had to basically go through all of my scripts and then change item to equipment. There might still be a few I will have to double check, but also I cleaned up our scenes here. So now we have the different scenes, and then we have interfaces, and in here we have the different interfaces, and we'll have utility and the skills, and then in the battle simulator we have basically everything related to the battle simulator. So it's a lot more clean, and I'm very happy. I went ahead and created a lane manager component, which basically is gonna be in charge of changing the lanes. The logic right now is not the best, and the plan is for the hero to, whenever it switches lanes, to go back to its own nexus and then out. Later on this will be configured so it will be smart instead, so we'll definitely not go through enemy territory and such, but right now in the beginning I just need it to kind of work, and then I can start working on states. Set it up a little bit with the battle manager. So currently you can see the heroes over on the side. We, for example, take the guy who's top lane, let's tell him to go bot lane, and the other girl to go top lane. As you can see, going to the nexus and now it's not currently working. And this guy's just stuck for some reason. Now he starts moving. They're using the pushing state, so the same as the minions. Some of the logic will only start working once I start doing states specifically for heroes. So that's what's next. So I've been busy. I did record a small update, smallish, before this update, but I had played around with some audio settings, and needless to say I could not use that recording because I couldn't bear to watch it, and I didn't want you guys to watch it. Anyway, a lot of stuff has happened. It's actually starting to look like a game, so I'll try and go through it and not say too much of the same stuff that I've already said. I can't entirely remember what I said before, so bear with me. I've included the damage numbers, so when stuff gets hit, they now show damage numbers, and they also flash. So a little bit of life in the scene. The lane manager component is now correctly working, so the heroes will go back to the nexus and then out to the lane. Then we introduced a lot of new states. and they all seem to actually work and switch depending on criteria that I set up. So let's start with going into the state machine. This is where it's mostly happening, at least the switching between states. We have this function called update state, and basically it just listens to if our health bar component gets updated or the value changes in there, and depending on that, it will basically switch to a new state. So we check here that the value is greater than the total at least by 60%, then it is aggressive. If it's above 20%, it will be defensive. If it is below 20, we will put it into retreat state. And if it's lower than 0, we are basically dead. And that's all that this does, and it checks every time we lose HP. The only time it doesn't is if we are currently changing our lane. So if we are going back to the Nexus, we don't want to suddenly go into aggressive state or defensive state or whatever. We just want to go back to the Nexus, get healed up, and get out. I want to get into the states now, and in my first recording of this I went a little bit too in depth, and I kind of wanted to be more of a quick run through so you get the idea of what's happening and not too much into the code per se. In the aggressive state, basically what we want to do is we want to focus towers and heroes before we focus minions, and that's basically what the code does. So first we find the ally that is closest to the enemy. Most of the time that will be the minion, or it could be the tower, and then we walk to that and we follow our most frontline ally, and then when we get to an enemy we then scan, or we have like the bubble around the hero. I can go into 2D mode. As you know, we have the hitbox, and in this hitbox we can see who's in there, and if there's a hero then we focus the hero. If it's a tower, then we focus the tower in front of the minion. And the priority right now is basically just integers. I could do some constants up here, which I probably should do, like main priority and such. Right now it's just set up as different priorities. So if it's a hero, it's priority 3. If it's a tower on the Nexus, it's priority 2. And if it's a minion, it's priority 1. And if we don't have any targets, we are at priority 0. So basically, it's just gonna go through this list and then choose a target. Now, what's also going to happen within the aggressive is when we focus the hero, it will actually get that hero's stats component, and it will check how much health they have. And if their health is below 30% and our own health is above 60%, we go into what is called chasing state. And the chasing state is basically as long as we are above 50% HP and our target is in range, so we have like the enemy is still within our range, we will basically follow that target and try to kill them. And then once this is no longer true, we go back to the state machine and we basically just call this function. So we check our HP. If we still have a lot of HP, we go to the aggressive state, defensive, retreat, whatever it needs to be. Now for the defensive state, it basically does the same as the aggressive state, at least with pathfinding. We find the ally that is the closest to the enemy. But instead of focusing a tower or hero, it just focuses whatever gets into contact first. So we just want to kill the minion, or we want to kill the hero or whatever. And that's basically all it does. It could be cool in here to add the logic that maybe as soon as something gets into range, we stop there and then start attacking. Currently it will just continue to walk even if someone gets into range, just to get as close to the minion as possible. So that could be a cool logic. Also, if we plan on doing longer range for ranged heroes, for example the marksman might have longer range, then that logic would make a lot of sense. But yeah, that's basically it. And we then, at the end of our walking, we basically just set our target as the first target that entered our range. Then of course we have the retreat state, which happens when we are below 20% HP. What it does is we first of all set our target to nothing, because I added that every time we attack there is a little cooldown of 0.2 seconds where basically we cannot move, we become immovable, and while we are movable we don't move. So when we're retreating, we do not want to attack, we just want to run back to the Nexus, and that's basically all this state does. it figures out which one is our nexus, and then it runs to it. Now for the lane change state. Now this state just basically every time we change lane, it just goes into the lane manager component, finds our nexus, and then just heads there. And then once we get there, we just call the update state to find out what state it is going to be. Right now it's always going to be aggressive because we wait to get full HP before we leave the nexus. So, but I put this in here that it checks in case at some point we want to do some more logic that just heal up to 60% and get back out in lane if like something is required, or let's say in our battle menu we have on the side, we can say go back to nexus, heal up, and then there'll be a button to just go out in lane again. Like don't wait to get healed up, then we will need it to just check what our ASP is. So that's already set up. Now for the getting healing state, it's pretty simple. It's basically you cannot move. And then once we're full HP, we change state into aggressive. Dead state I don't think I covered, but basically we do not want to Q3 the hero, because later in the project we might add that the heroes in game can actually get a level, so like you can level up the hero and maybe later unlock ultimate once they're level 6 in like that match itself, or they get gold and can buy items, and then if we queue it free we would have to save all this data. So right now what we are doing is when they die we move them off the map and we make them so they can't move, and yeah, and then once the respawn time is up we change states so they can move again and we heal them to full HP. And that's basically the states. I hope you guys made it through. Let's go ahead and show you. So right now, as you can see, we actually have a debug level label, which just says what state they're in currently. And since they're above the 60% threshold, they're all aggressive. Now changing into defensive. This guy got really low, so he turned into retreat state, and he's just going back to the base. And then as soon as the minion comes up, they follow it, and when the minion dies, they'll fall back to the tower. She's retreat state. She actually died. And yeah, that's basically the logic right now for the game. I'm pretty excited where we are at. The next thing we're going to work on, and you might have seen it a little bit about the states, is the ability system. I finally figured out how I'm going to implement it so that it's scalable. I had some issues trying to figure that out, but it's finally there, and now I cannot wait to set up the abilities. All the abilities have been created and added. They don't look too cool right now because there's no actual visual, but all the code has been done. And in my opinion, it's scalable. It could maybe be done better in a different way, but I don't know that way. I will now walk you through it. How it starts out is from the hero script when they get instantiated. If they are currently only the friendly hero, they will call the ability component, set up ability, and then in here they will send the hero skill. So if we look at a hero resource, for example M, they will have an ability over here, skill, which is basically a skill resource, which if you check here, we can then go in and find it. It's second chance. In here, it will have some different stats, like a cooldown. M's is actually this one. Here we'll have cooldown. M's will not have a cooldown, and then damage, and then some details about it, the picture and whatnot. And then in there, we will have an ability script. So with this one comes this script, and it's just basically attached to it. This was the part I struggled with a lot, because now I have a script, but I don't have a node. So what I did before I did this system was I actually made a scene for every single ability, and then just instantiated it on the hero. And I don't think that was necessary, so I really wanted to find a way where we could connect the ability to the resource that could be connected to the resource. And you cannot have functionality within a resource, and you could not bind a scene to a resource either. So finally figured out this, that you could create a script, and we could then link the script to the ability. If you want to see, it looks like this ability script, and it's just a script. So when we open up an ability, we are actually able to we're actually able to choose a script here. So for all the abilities, I just choose the one that is appropriate for this specific ability. Later on, that means that if we will have a lot of abilities and some heroes share abilities, then you will be able to just pick the ability and then everything should work, and it basically just cycles through them. Anyway, with all that done, let's take a look at how the ability component actually puts this script into use. So the hero calls the setup ability function, which gets the skill. And then the first thing we do is we add ability logic, which is just a node2d. So under the ability component, we add a node2d. And this is not simply just a node, because we actually do need to know where this is. Because a lot of the abilities have some sort of positioning logic to it, and if it's just a node, then there is no positioning and the ability actually doesn't know where it is, and then you have to set it equal to the hero. But if you just do it like as node2d, it follows the hero everywhere it goes, so that's the simplest. So we add that as a child, and then after a little bit, making sure the tree has been instantiated perfectly, and inside of the ability logic node, we add a script, and in there we just set the ability script, which in this case would be the explosive final script. So that means we create a node, we add the script to that node, and then after that, if that ability has set up skill, it then runs that. So let's go ahead and say it is the explosive final script. It then runs this function as soon as it gets instantiated. And in here, the first thing it actually does is just to set up some variables. I tried to make this one extend ability component, because we have a lot of the different components from the hero, so like the tech component and its parent node. All of this is kind of needed in a lot of the abilities, but when I extended it, somehow all of these variables was null. And I think it's because of the set script here. If it's not already set and you set it in code, then the variables gets lost. I am almost 100% certain that there's a workaround on this, but I don't know it. So if you do know a way to do it a better way, please let me know. Anyway, what we just do firstly is just add whatever this node needs. So this ability needs to know, first of all, the hero, and then it needs to know the parent, which is the ability component, and then it needs to know its skill resource. So this needs some of the details, for example, the cooldown or the damage. And then we just get the different nodes that it also needs. It needs access to the stats component, the attack component, and the def component. And inside of the stats component, it needs to know whenever we are no longer have any more health. And that's because this ability, when you reach 0 health, she actually explodes. Or basically, she will shoot a missile that targets the enemy hero, if there is one. She's currently targeting, else there'll just be an explosion around where she dies. Now, to set that up, we do two things. We first set up an area 2D. So up here we have an area 2D node, and we just add that as a child to this ability. And then we set some different variables, making sure that if it's an enemy, then we have to set it up for these values. Currently we don't really set up abilities for enemies, but I thought I would want to future-proof it in case we want to add enemies at some point. And then we also want to make sure that we add the basically the collision shape to the area 2D, and it also needs a shape, so that's the circle shape, which we set up down here, and that's basically the radius. So what this script all does is a little bit confusing to me too, but first we create a node 2D in the ability component. Here we create the ability explosive final script, and then that creates a child which is an area 2D. And then area 2D needs a collision shape, so we create and add that as a child. And then the collision shape actually needs a shape, which in this case will be the circle shape. And then we set the radius of that shape to 150. I hope you're with me. It's not the easiest thing, but yeah. If not, please do look through the code and go through it separately, or ask questions in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer anything you might have questions about. Now, for the explosive final, currently it actually does not work with targeting enemy hero. And there's a few reasons for this. You actually, once she dies, a lot of the logic we need in order to select hero becomes null. In the future, I want there to be like a scoreboard, so you can see who killed who, And when we do that, we would just be able to say this ability, and then whoever killed this hero, she will shoot the missile at, and that's great. But currently that doesn't work, and I don't want to spend too much time figuring out a workaround when I know that this is going to be implemented later. So right now, she basically just explodes around herself. Now, for how it does it is, first it it gets the list of possible targets depending if it's an enemy. It will get from team, else it will get nodes in the group of enemy. And then it just runs through them, checks that if it's either a minion or hero, because this ability will not damage towers. And then we want to check if they are within the radius of our collision shape. And then if they are, we want to make sure that they take damage equal to the skills damage, and it also takes actually equal to the hero's like physical damage. And that's the explosive final, and that's the general gist of how we're doing abilities. I will run through all of them, but just quickly compared to this one, just kind of show you what they do. There's also some more logic I did that I also want to share you. So within the crushing blow, this is for Egon, I believe, the fighter. This one basically has a timer, and the timer is just to make sure you can do cooldown, so the cooldown timer. And we in the setup, when we just start the script, it gets reference to its parent, so the ability component, and it also gets a reference to the skill, which it needs for both the cooldown timer and the damage. And then we set up the cooldown timer. Basically, we just here set it to the cooldown of the hero, and then we also make sure we add it as a child, so we can actually use the timer. And then we want to set up some stats, like it has to be one shot, and we want to auto start. The reason we are doing auto start is as soon as the game loads in, we actually want the ability to be on cooldown. I guess you could not do that, and it wouldn't do too much. Actually, maybe they shouldn't. But right now they are. Let me know if you think this should be on or not. And then this ability basically just every time we deal damage, we have, if this ability is of cooldown, it will be used and it will deal our damage plus the damage of the skill. And then also, if the person we are dealing damage to has a status effect component, which only heroes will have. At the moment, we might add it to minions. Honestly, it probably should be added to minions. In the works. Then we can then ask if it has method handle stun, because this ability actually stuns. Yes! And then if it does, then we'll ask that component, the status effect component, to handle stun, and then the stun duration, which is currently just been set up in here. I don't want to do it in the skill, because not all skills have stun, and maybe it should be in there. But for right now, it's just going to be up here. And I guess we can move into our new component, which is status effect component. And in here, it's basically, there's two different things it'll handle. It'll handle slow, and it will handle stun. The crushing blow basically stuns, so what it does is it gets a duration that needs to be stunned. What it will do then is in the attack component it will pause, and it will also make the character unable to move, so it can't attack and it can't move. And it will do that for this duration, because we set the timer to wait for this duration, and then we start it. And then once it finishes or times out, we will do not stunned, and we'll basically set these values to false. Now, if you're very astute, this actually does not do anything to abilities right now. And I did not want to do the logic for it, because right now we can only stun enemies, and enemies doesn't have abilities, and yeah, I kind of want to get this video out. So there is a little bit of shortcuts here and there, and it's the same thing for slow, though for the slow we also take the slow amount. So we have a slow multiplier, which is currently just 1. That allows us to minus the slow amount of the 1, and then we can just times it by that. The reason I've done that is for, I believe, let me show you the skill, I think it's Mystic Overflow. In here we can just do that the slow amount is 0.2. That makes it very readable that it slows by 20%. And then we can just withdraw that from the 1, and that way it automatically gets the 20% slow, because it's 0.8 times the movement speed. If we did just do minus the movement speed, it would look a little bit more ugly. Or it would be 0.8, we would have to say, and it's maybe a little bit less readable, that the slow is actually 20%. At least in my case, that's what I think. So that's why I did the logic like that. And otherwise, it's basically the same. You set the timer for the duration of the slow, and then you start the timer, and then once the... One thing it does do is it saves the data of original movement speed, just so you know what the movement speed of the hero is, and then once we are no longer slowed, we set it back to the original movement speed. The reason I do it like this is in case the hero gets slowed multiple times, then the movement speed will be a little bit whack. So we want to return it to what it was originally. And that's all. Currently we also have these statements like is slowed equals false, and is stunned, which currently is not getting used, but in the future they might, so I just left them in there. For the rest of the abilities, the aura ability is on our tank, and it basically just is a circle. We create again the different collision shape in area 2D, and then what it does is it takes whatever is within the range of him, and it applies a 20% damage reduction. How it does that is inside of the hurt component. We added a little bit of information about the damage taken. There will be actual damage taken, so it will be whatever we take damage off, and then our damage reductions, which is currently set to 1, so right now it doesn't do anything. But Fred will basically go in and adjust this for all of his allies within range. So it will be 0.8. And then here will just be damage taken times 0.8. So we take 20% of the damage off. And yeah, that's basically the logic. So the ability handles all of the logic. The only thing I had to add is the damage reduction in here. But honestly, this should probably be inside of the stats component now that I think of it. I will do that, actually. I'll do that right away. We're back. It was a little bit more painful than I thought it would be, but basically in here it looks a lot better now. It's just the stats component dot my damage reduction. So all the logic, all the at least variables is in the stats component, and in the stats component we basically just added it here. Now for the ability, it's a little bit more painful. Before, basically the area was the hurt box, so we could just easily access the data. Now we kinda have to first get the parent of the area and set it as the area parent, which is basically the hero or minion. And then we wanna get the children of the node, and then if it's a stat component, then we can take that, or the child stats component, and then set the damage reduction modifier. It still works the same. I just had to add all of this code, basically. Wait, all of these lines here, but it should work flawlessly. And yeah, that's what this ability does. Let's move on. Loot Finder, very simple ability. Basically, once it gets launched, it goes in and it just adds 0.10% to the loot bonus, which means after the game is finished, you get 10% more loot. I guess I can show you how it looks inside the reward manager. We have Modlock, I believe, which is 1, and how it does it is this is very, it's not complicated per se, it just took a little bit of figuring out. But if you're very interested in how to do a loot based system, I think this system is really good, so you should check it out. But anyway, after we figured out the amount of loot we get, we basically just times it by our Modlock, which right now is just 1%, so it doesn't do anything. But we then add 0.1, and it basically just takes whatever the number of this is and adds 10%. Alright, moving on to the next ability, Fast and Furious. Mystic Overflow, I think that is the ability that basically just it deals damage and slows the enemy. It's from our mage. The damage it deals is based off of how much damage the ability does, and then the hero's ability power divided by 2, because for balancing, well, honestly, all of the stats of the different heroes needs to be adjusted. But right now the ability does way too much damage if it does like his full ability power, so I had to divide it by 2. And then it also does the slow thing, same as the stun from the other ability. I'm not gonna go through it, already did. The last ability up is second chance, which is our support's ability. What it does is it basically listens to if our ally dies. It just listens to if it's no longer health, and if that happens and the ability is off cooldown, it just uses his respawn mechanic. So he comes back to spawn with full HP, and this ability goes on cooldown. So it's just a resurrection, basically. It took forever to do. I'm not entirely happy with how it's done, but it works. I would show you all of these abilities, but again, there's no visuals, there's no sound effects. It's not the coolest to look at, but they are all functional. I tested every single one of them. And in the next video, I will go ahead and I will create visuals for every ability, maybe sound effects, and I want to add some game juice to the actual board, so it's a little bit more juicy to look at. Maybe a little bit of screen shake just to the board when we do big abilities, or when monsters die, maybe it'll come like a little smoke screen so you can see something actually died. And yeah, so a lot of game juice. I also want to actually do a visual for when hero is dead. You can see when they're gonna respawn again. And yeah, next video is gonna be super cool. I cannot wait to set all of that up. It's gonna make everything just look so much cooler. With that said, this video is over. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.